April 1204. Flames climb the skyline of Constantinople. Smoke rolls over the harbor. Bells ring, but no army comes. Men wearing crosses on their chests smash open churches. They drag gold from altars. They pry jewels from sacred icons. Some laugh, some pray, most just take. Inside the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, soldiers lead horses across marble floors. Relics vanish into foreign hands. This city has stood for 8 centuries. It has survived Persians, Arabs, and Bulgars. Tonight, it falls to fellow Christians. A crusade meant to defend the faith has turned its sword inward. How did it come to this?
In the year 1200, Christendom was not one solid block. It was 2 worlds staring at each other across the Mediterranean. In the east stood Constantinople. Its emperors called themselves Roman. Its court spoke Greek. Its merchants grew rich on silk and spice. Its churches shimmered with mosaics and incense. The empire had laws older than most kingdoms in the West. In the West, power looked different. Kings fought for land. Knights chased honor. The Pope claimed spiritual authority over all Christians. Rome spoke Latin. The East did not. The split in 1054, what historians called the Great Schism, had already cracked the unity of the Church. Each side prayed to the same God. Each side mistrusted the other's rituals. Trade deepened the rivalry. Italian cities grew bold. Among them, Venice rose fastest. Venetian ships crowded Byzantine harbors. They carried goods, but also ambition. Byzantines saw Western knights as rough and impulsive. Western Crusaders saw Byzantines as proud and unreliable. Neither view was entirely fair. Both were powerful. Still, the balance held. The emperor ruled from his palace. The Pope called crusades. Venice counted profits. The Holy Land remained the shared concern. On the surface, this was a divided family trying to stay polite. Underneath, old wounds waited for pressure. It would not take much to turn suspicion into disaster.
In 1198, Pope Innocent III called for a new crusade. Jerusalem was still in Muslim hands. The mission was clear: sail east, strike Egypt, reclaim the Holy City. Knights across France answered. They swore vows, they sold land, they stitched crosses onto their cloaks. There was one problem: they had no fleet. So they turned to Venice. The Venetians agreed to build ships large enough to carry an army across the city. It was a massive contract. Timber was cut, harbors filled with hulls. Then the bill arrived. The Crusaders could not pay the full amount. Venice did not shout, it negotiated. The Doge proposed a solution: help Venice capture Zara, a rebellious Christian port that had slipped from Venetian control. Do this, and the debt would shrink. Zara was not Jerusalem. It was not even Muslim. Some Crusaders protested. The Pope forbade attacking Christians. But hunger and debt speak loudly. The army voted. They sailed against Zara anyway. The walls fell, the city was taken. For the first time, a crusade attacked fellow Christians. The oath still pointed toward Jerusalem. The path had already begun to bend.
Winter settled over the Crusader camp after Zara fell. The army was restless. Some feared God's anger, others feared unpaid debts more. Then a visitor arrived. His name was Alexios Angelos. He was young, ambitious, and desperate. His father, a former Byzantine emperor, sat imprisoned in Constantinople. The throne now belonged to his uncle. Alexios brought a promise. "Restore me," he said, "and I will reward you." He offered silver to clear their debts. He offered troops for the crusade. He even offered to submit the Byzantine Church to Rome. It was a generous proposal, almost too generous. The Crusader leaders listened carefully. Venice listened even more carefully. A friendly emperor in Constantinople meant trade privileges, ports, influence. Some knights hesitated. This was not the Holy Land. This was politics. But the numbers made sense. The treasury of Constantinople was legendary. If the prince spoke truth, the crusade could recover. So the army made a choice. They would sail east, not to fight Muslims, but to reshape an empire. Alexios smiled. He had just invited a foreign army to his own capital. History rarely rewards that decision.
In the summer of 1203, the Crusader fleet appeared before Constantinople. Its walls rose high above the sea. For centuries, they had stopped every enemy. Now, Latin sails crowded the horizon. The Crusaders attacked from land and water. Venetian ships lashed themselves to the seawalls. Ladders rose. Fighting spilled onto the battlements. Fires broke out in the city. Panic spread faster than flame. The reigning emperor fled. Almost overnight, the throne changed hands. Alexios Angelos entered the city and was crowned Emperor Alexios IV beside his restored father. The Crusaders waited for payment. At first, gold flowed. Church treasures were melted, taxes were raised. But the imperial treasury was not endless. Decades of war and corruption had drained it. To raise more money, Alexios squeezed his own people. That decision cost him trust.
Riots erupted in the streets. Many Byzantines already distrusted the Latin soldiers camped outside their walls. Now they resented their own emperor as well. Anti-Latin violence flared. Parts of the city burned again. The Crusaders watched their promised reward shrink. Inside the palace, Alexios struggled. He had invited a foreign army to secure his throne. Now that same army demanded more than he could give. By early 1204, patience snapped. A palace coup overthrew Alexios IV. He was imprisoned. Soon after, he was dead. The Crusaders stood outside the city, unpaid and unwelcome. Their ally was gone, their debt remained, and the richest city in Europe lay within reach.
Winter tightened its grip in early 1204. The Crusaders camped outside Constantinople, cold, unpaid, and running out of patience. Their candidate was dead. The throne now belonged to a new emperor who refused to honor Alexios IV's promises. From the city walls came insults instead of silver. The Crusades stood at a crossroads. Some argued they should abandon the venture and sail to the Holy Land as originally sworn. Others asked a harder question: with what money? The leaders gathered. Among them stood the aged Doge of Venice, Enrico Dandolo, blind but not powerless. Venice had built the fleet. Venice expected payment. If the Byzantines would not pay willingly, there was another option: take the city. It was not an impulsive riot, it was a calculation. Constantinople held wealth beyond imagination: gold, relics, trade routes. Control the city and the debt vanishes. Control the city and power shifts across the Mediterranean.
There were objections. Some feared damnation, others feared failure. The walls were still formidable, but hunger sharpens ambition. In council, the majority chose conquest. This was the moment the crusade shed its last disguise. No more talk of helping a prince, no more pretense of temporary intervention. They would claim the empire for themselves. Once that decision passed, retreat became almost impossible. An army that declares war cannot simply apologize. The target was no longer distant Jerusalem. It was the city in front of them. And now, there would be no turning back.
In April 1204, the waiting ended. The Crusaders prepared for a full assault on Constantinople. The land wall still looked unbreakable, so they turned again to the sea. Venetian ships moved first. They sailed straight toward the towering sea walls, their masts rising nearly level with the battlements. Planks were lowered, ladders hooked onto stone. Arrows darkened the air. Defenders fought hard. They hurled stones. They pushed ladders back. For a moment, it seemed the city might hold, as it always had. Then, wind shifted. Venetian vessels closed the gap. A small group of attackers gained a foothold on the walls. It was not a massive breakthrough. It was a crack. But cracks spread. Once a banner rose above the battlements, panic followed. Crusaders forced open gates from inside. Fires broke out in nearby districts. The flames moved faster than commands. Citizens fled through smoke-filled streets. Soldiers abandoned positions. Leadership inside the city faltered. The new emperor chose escape over defense. For 8 centuries, Constantinople had repelled invaders: Arabs, Bulgars, Rus.
Its walls were legend. That reputation carried weight. When it finally failed, morale failed with it. By nightfall, foreign troops stood inside the city. There was still fighting, there was still chaos, but the outcome had shifted. The siege was no longer a contest. The barrier between army and treasure had fallen. And once soldiers enter a city by force, restraint rarely follows.
When the walls fell, discipline fell with them. For 3 days, the Crusaders looted Constantinople. Homes were broken open, warehouses emptied, gold vanished into sacks and saddlebags. Those who resisted were cut down, those who hid were often found. Churches did not escape. Inside the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, soldiers stripped the altar of precious metals. Sacred vessels were seized. Relics, objects believed to carry divine power, were packed for transport west. Some men mocked what others considered holy, faith bent under greed. Even seasoned crusaders seemed stunned by the scale of wealth. Constantinople had been called the richest city in Christendom. Now that wealth changed hands in hours. Venetians moved methodically. They selected art, statues, and treasures for shipment home. Horses cast in bronze would later stand above St. Mark's in Venice, a silent souvenir of victory. Not every crusader approved. Some tried to protect churches, some felt shame, but shame does little against momentum. Violence spread beyond calculation. Fires destroyed entire districts. Civilians suffered most. When it ended, the city was quieter, not peaceful, just exhausted. The army had taken what it wanted. A crusade meant to defend Christian lands had sacked the greatest Christian capital on earth. The irony was not subtle. And there was still the matter of what to do with an empire they had just broken.
After the smoke cleared, the victors faced an awkward question. Who rules now? The Crusader leaders divided the spoils first. Gold, land, titles, everything was measured and allotted. Then they created something new, the Latin Empire of Constantinople. A Western noble, Baldwin of Flanders, was crowned emperor inside Hagia Sophia. The ceremony looked grand, the foundations were not. Venice secured key ports and islands. Trade privileges were written into law. The Doge did not take the throne, but he took what mattered. Meanwhile, Byzantine nobles fled. Some escaped to Nicaea, others to Epirus or Trebizond. They did not surrender their claim to the Roman legacy. They began building rival states almost immediately. The new Latin rulers controlled the capital, but not loyalty. They faced hostility from the population, pressure from Bulgaria, and constant resistance from Byzantine successors. An empire had changed hands, but it had not become stable. The Crusaders had won a city. They had inherited a problem. And problems do not vanish just because you crown a new emperor.
The Latin Empire did not last long. In 1261, Byzantine forces retook Constantinople. The Roman line returned to the throne. But the damage remained. The treasury was thin, the fleet was weak. Trade had shifted toward Venice and other Italian powers. Trust between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christians was shattered. The wound did not close. When the Ottomans rose in the 14th and 15th centuries, Byzantium faced them diminished. In 1453, Constantinople fell again, this time to Mehmed II. Many historians argue that 1204 made that final siege easier. The empire never fully recovered from the Crusaders' blow. The Fourth Crusade was meant to defend Christendom. Instead, it fractured it. An army set out to reclaim Jerusalem. It ended by weakening the very shield that once guarded Europe's eastern frontier. History rarely needs enemies when allies make the wrong choices.